Here's how to replace the slave cylinder seal on your reversible plate. First, take off the access panel by using a 13mm socket and removing the 5 bolts. Okay, the next step is to get a clean plastic container to catch your oil. We want to reuse the hydraulic oil inside of this. Put it underneath the slave cylinder bleed screw. Use a 14mm socket. Open up the bleed screw and remove it completely, allowing the oil to drain out until it's empty. Okay, after the oil is done draining, you'll still get some dripping. We're going to take a 6mm Allen head socket and we're going to go in and grab each one of these 4 bolts inside of here, break them loose and remove them. Now that you're done removing the 4 bolts that hold the slave cylinder to the exciter box, we're going to put the plug back in for the bleed screw. Just finger tight. You do not have to torque it down. Okay, so the next step that we're going to do is try to get the rest of the oil out from inside of the slave cylinder. We're going to do that by removing the slave cylinder off the piston. You can pull out on the slave cylinder if it happens to be loose enough. Sometimes it's a little stuck on there. You can get a pry bar in underneath the flange to drive it out. There's some M6 tapped holes here that you can run bolts in to drive it out, or you can take a small, just a light brass hammer. You can give it a little tap to break it loose. We pull out the slave cylinder a little bit, not all the way off the piston, because it'll leak out the back. Slide your plastic tray for your oil behind that and pull this off the rest of the way, and the oil will drip out into the back of that, into the container. Turn it down a little bit just to get the rest of the oil out, and now we've got all the oil out of the system. Alright, so now we've got the cylinder off and you can see the seals inside. You'll also see there's a little bit of this gray debris here. This is just extra sealant for the O-ring, so there's nothing to worry about there. We can just wipe that off, but you'll see that periodically. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this green seal off. We do that by using a small screwdriver, or in this case a small pick. Get underneath the seal, pry it up and pull it off. Okay, so I've got my pick underneath the seal, and all I have to do is lift up and pry this off kind of carefully. It does rotate, so watch out for that, and the seal is now off. Alright, so now we're going to put our new brown seal on. I dip it in just a little bit of the hydraulic oil that came out to make it easier to install. Make sure that you have the cup shape pointed towards the side of the machine, not in. If it's pointed in like this, it's on wrong and it won't seal. The cup portion of it has to be pointed out. And they can be a little challenging, takes 2 hands sometimes, but you just work it on over the piston until it pops in and gets down in the groove. So sometimes you'll see the seal doesn't want to roll over completely and get into the groove, so you just take a small screwdriver pick and press down the inside around here to make sure that it's down in the groove. And just work it around like this, real slowly, being careful not to cut the seal, and just drive it down in until it's all sitting down in the groove, and it just pops down in like that. Okay, we're just about ready to install the cylinder back on, but before we do that, we want to lubricate the outside of the seal. So in this case, I'm taking just a little bit of general purpose grease and I'm going to put it on the outside of the seal and work it around and rotate the piston. You can use a little bit of the hydraulic oil too, that works. I like to use grease just because it's a little stickier and stays on there. But this just helps keep the seal from being dry the first time the exciter starts spinning and we don't have any wear issues. Now that we've got the seal greased, we're going to take and install the cylinder on over it. Real simple, just fit it up on the piston. You'll feel it line up and just kind of carefully wiggle it around and you'll feel it slip on the seal, line up the bolt holes, and we're ready to reinstall the bolts. Okay, reinstalling the bolts that hold the cylinder on. We're going to use a red thread locker. We put a little bit of red thread locker on and then start the bolts by hand. You may have to rotate the cylinder just a little bit until you feel it slip into the groove or slip into the threads. Rotate that by hand, do that with all 4 bolts, and then torque the bolt down to about 25 foot-pounds in a rotational pattern around this. All right, next thing we need to do is we need to refill or backfill the handle. So this plug is the fill for the hydraulic circuit on this, or the hydraulic control circuit. We use a 17mm socket and remove that plug. And then we take the oil that we had from the drain and we fill it back into this hole using a funnel. Keep the handle in the forward position. Having it in the forward position allows the oil to drain down into the hose and down towards the slave cylinder where all the air is trapped. Okay, now we're going to bleed the air out of the system, and what we're going to do is, again, loosen up our bleed screw down here, or bleed plug down here. You're going to have someone help you by pulling back on the handle. So pull back. When they pull back, they hold it back, and that just pushed a bunch of air out of the system. I'm going to tighten it back up and then have them push the handles forward. And then I'm going to loosen it up again and have them pull the handle backward. And now we start to see fluid come out. So this is just like bleeding brakes, right? We get that to the point where we get fluid coming out. And we do that a couple more times just to get all the air out of the system and keep backfilling the fluid up in the handle to make sure that you don't run out of fluid. Okay, the very last thing we're going to do is top off the oil up in the handle. As you can see here, you want to top it off to a level where it's just barely visible over a metal block inside of there. It should be about 3/8 of an inch from the top or from the bottom of the threads. The handle needs to be in the full upright position, the base handle, and then the handle levers, the directional control levers, need to be pushed all the way forward for that. After it's been topped off to that level, we reinstall the plug. It's a 17mm socket, and we torque that down to 20 foot-pounds. All right, last thing we're going to do after we're done bleeding is we're going to tighten down the bleeder screw. We tighten that down to about 25 foot-pounds with a 14mm socket and torque wrench. Then we're going to reinstall the panel that we had taken off, the access panel. We put blue Loctite on this, so medium strength Loctite, and we torque each one of these bolts to 22 foot-pounds with a 13mm socket.